It should have ended when the bikers won guardianship of the boy from the woods. But the man who stole his inheritance wasn't finished. As the truth about the crash resurfaced, the timber vultures realized they weren't just protecting just a child anymore. They were guarding an heir someone wanted erased. For a little while, the timber vultures let themselves believe the worst had passed. Cameron, still more ash than anything else, was settling into a rhythm that resembled childhood. In the weeks since Lauren first arrived at the clubhouse and Cameron whispered his name aloud for the first time, small but steady changes had settled into their days. He startled less, spoke a little more, and leaned into routine the way someone recovering from chaos clings to patterns. Nothing dramatic, just quiet steps forward that made the camp feel different from those early days when he still lived half in the forest. Victoria bought him soft shirts that didn't scrape his skin. Oscar taught him how to hold a pencil without gripping it like a twig. Lauren turned a corner of the clubhouse into an improvised classroom, sunlight catching chalk dust as Cameron traced letters one careful line at a time. But peace in their world never lasted long. It started with murmurs in town. A bartender at the trading post mentioned that 2 out-of-state reporters were asking about the wild kid from the Pines. A gas station attendant told Doug that strangers kept showing a blurry phone photo of Cameron near the fire pit, the kind of whispers that carried too clearly on rural wind. Then came the cars. Not many, just enough to make Doug feel the road was gathering eyes. Sedans slowing near the trailhead, SUVs creeping past the ridge road as if studying the land. They never stopped. They never rolled down windows. But the way they circled felt too deliberate, too patient. Still, unease tightened around the camp like an approaching storm. What had begun as the occasional SUV idling near the trailhead during Cameron's first weeks with them had sharpened into something more deliberate, cars returning on the same routes, pausing in the same spots, the kind of repetition no one could dismiss as coincidence. Doug called Ruth immediately. She arrived the next morning with a worn messenger bag and a look that said she hadn't slept. Ever since Doug first called her weeks earlier, she had been steadily peeling back the layers of the Wyatt case, each new discovery darker than the last. I dug deeper, she told them by the picnic tables. The hospital where Cameron was taken after the crash? Records from that night are missing. Deleted, not misplaced. She tapped her folder. Someone inside helped wipe them. Oscar felt his jaw lock. Still think Barrett wants to settle this quietly? Ruth shook her head. Barrett Wyatt doesn't hire a private security firm unless he's cornered. He's not searching for a boy, he's searching for a threat. Victoria looked back toward the cabin where Cameron stood on the porch, trying on a jacket she'd hemmed to his size. He still tensed slightly whenever someone spoke his real name, but he no longer recoiled from it the way he had in those first days after remembering it. The sleeves hung a little long. He tugged at them thoughtfully, adjusting to the sensation of fabric instead of leaves and dirt. He's trying so hard, Victoria murmured. He deserves to breathe for 5 minutes. Which is exactly why his uncle won't let him, Ruth said. Lauren arrived soon after, carrying a stack of workbooks. She had been returning to the clubhouse regularly ever since that first morning she stepped onto the gravel, her sessions quietly becoming part of Cameron's new rhythm. Cameron watched her step into the clubhouse with a mixture of curiosity and caution, his fingers brushing the doorway as if checking it was still safe. She had started teaching him simple routines, how to sit at a table, how to follow gentle instructions, how to ask for a break when the world grew too loud. He rarely spoke, but he nodded more often now. That alone was progress. Lauren's early sessions had helped loosen memories he once could only gesture at, making his quiet yes or no far more deliberate than they had been when he first walked out of the woods. The club did everything they could to keep life feeling normal. Oscar took Cameron on short rides around the property, the boy sitting behind him with hands loosely hooked into Oscar's vest. Victoria taught him to wash his shirts in the outdoor sink, laughing softly when he splashed more water on himself than the fabric. Doug kept a watch list of suspicious license plates in a notebook he kept folded in his back pocket. Still, the unease didn't fade. Late one afternoon, Oscar spotted Cameron standing by the workshop, frozen in place. His eyes were fixed on the road, where a black sedan had just slowed before speeding up again. Oscar walked over carefully. "You okay?" he asked. Cameron didn't answer, but he raised one hand and shaped a small curve in the air, something passing by, watching but not stopping. Oscar understood. "That's what we're here for," he said quietly. "To make sure they keep driving." But reassurance didn't settle the tension. Not completely. That evening, Doug called a meeting around the fire pit. The flames cracked low, throwing long silhouettes across the gravel. "We've got eyes on us," he said. "Not reporters, not curiosity, professional surveillance." Ruth nodded. Barrett lost control of the estate. If Cameron stays protected long enough for the audit to finish, his uncle's entire empire collapses. He won't let that happen without a fight. Victoria pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "And we just act like nothing's happening?" "No," Doug said. "We stay alert. We keep him in sight. We don't let anyone near the property unless we know who they are." Oscar hadn't spoken yet. He kept glancing toward the tree line, something tugging at the edge of his awareness. After the meeting ended, he walked the perimeter alone, boots sinking into the soft dirt. The woods hummed with the usual sounds: crickets, wind, the distant creek. Nothing unusual, but something still felt wrong, like a misplaced shadow. He paused near a patch of dense shrubs. A flicker of silver caught his eye, sunlight reflecting off something unnatural. He crouched, parted the branches, and froze. A small camera, no bigger than a pack of matches, was wired to the trunk of a sapling. Its lens pointed directly at the cabin porch. No amateur equipment. This was the kind of device used for long-term remote surveillance. Oscar's stomach dropped. He pulled it free with a steady hand, scanning the bushes for more. If there was one, there were likely others. Someone had been watching Cameron, recording him, studying him, and they hadn't been careless about it. Oscar stood slowly, camera in hand, jaw tightening as the reality of it landed. The forest wasn't sheltering the boy anymore. Now it was the place his enemies used to get close. By the time another week passed, Cameron had settled into Lauren's presence with a steadiness none of them had expected. Their sessions had started as hesitant minutes in the corner of the clubhouse, but now he met her with the quiet readiness of someone who understood he wasn't being tested, only guided. Lauren always began their sessions the same way, with the soft scrape of her chair on the clubhouse floor, a steadying breath, and a question that wasn't really a question. "You're safe here. Ready to sit with me for a moment?" Cameron never answered out loud, but he moved toward her slowly, pulling his knees onto the rug she'd laid out beneath the window. The morning light filtered through the blinds, striping his face in gentle gold. Some days he leaned into the light, others he hid from it. Today he just sat still, fingers brushing the fabric as if testing its texture. Lauren opened a box of items: pine needles, small wooden blocks, a fragment of cracked plastic. "We're going to remember together," she said. "Just enough for your mind to loosen the knot it's been holding." When Cameron's hand hovered over the plastic shard, his breathing changed. Some memories had surfaced in pieces during earlier sessions. Images, sensations, the shapes of things he couldn't yet name. But today something clearer pressed through. Not panic. Something deeper. Recognition. Lauren watched him carefully. If something comes, you don't have to force it. Just let the edges appear. The boy's gaze drifted far away, into a place only he could see. His voice, when it finally surfaced, was small, hoarse from disuse. "Gasoline." The word startled even him. Lauren kept her voice low. "You smelled gasoline?" He nodded. Then his shoulders tightened as though bracing for impact. "Glass loud." "You heard glass breaking?" Another nod. Small, quick, afraid to settle. And then, she whispered. Cameron swallowed. His lips parted again, trembling at the edges. Run, he whispered. Don't look back. The words felt stolen from a nightmare, except this one had happened wide awake. Lauren didn't push further. She just steadied him with quiet presence until the tremor in his hands eased. When the session ended, Cameron slipped outside, drawn instinctively toward the fire pit where Oscar was repairing a dented exhaust pipe. Oscar glanced up with a half-smile. You want to hand me that wrench? Cameron didn't answer, but he mimicked Oscar's posture, kneeling on one knee, bracing the metal the same way Oscar did. He concentrated so intensely that Oscar paused, studying him. You watching how I do it? He asked gently. Cameron nodded once. Oscar paused, realizing the boy wasn't just learning routine, he was mirroring him, choosing him as a point of balance, and this both warmed and frightened him. A sudden honk from the road shattered the quiet. Cameron jolted so hard the wrench clattered from his hand. His breath came fast, shallow. Victoria rushed from the porch immediately. It's just a horn, she soothed, kneeling beside him. Not someone yelling, not a threat. Her touch was careful, close enough to guide, never to trap. She waited until Cameron's breathing slowed before brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Loud sounds used to jolt me too, she said quietly. Oscar met her eyes. He had never heard her talk about her past. Victoria settled on the ground beside Cameron, voice steady. My father slammed doors when he was angry. I'd flinch every time I heard one, even years later. Took me forever to relearn what normal noise feels like. Cameron looked at her, not just listening, but absorbing. You're not broken, she told him. You learned to survive. Now we help your mind understand you're not in danger anymore. The afternoon passed slowly. Doug set up small tasks around the camp that let Cameron choose where he felt safe. Lauren prepared another session for the next day. Ruth sat at one of the picnic tables, laptop open, expression growing more tense by the minute. She waved Oscar over. I found something. He leaned over her shoulder. Who's Elias Mercer? Family driver. Fired a week after the crash. No record of misconduct. No reason given. She pulled up another file. And look at this. He checked into 3 different motels under false names in the months after Cameron disappeared. Oscar exhaled. So he ran too. Or someone wanted him gone. By early evening, Ruth traced him to a rundown motel off the interstate. She didn't tell Cameron or Victoria. No need to stir panic before knowing the truth. She just grabbed her jacket and told Doug she'd be back by dark. The motel sat behind a half-lit diner, the kind of place where paint peeled and neon signs hummed with exhaustion. Ruth spotted a man slipping out of room 12 with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. When he saw her, his face drained of color. Elias Mercer, she called. He bolted. Ruth ran after him. Steady, trained, her boots pounding against cracked pavement. Elias reached his truck, fumbled the keys, and dropped them. In his panic, he knocked something from his jacket, a thick manila envelope. He didn't bother retrieving it. He just scrambled into the truck, slammed it into gear, and tore out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind him. Ruth caught her breath, crouched, and lifted the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, grainy but unmistakable. A car crushed against a tree, headlights still on, a figure bending over the driver's side door. And no police tape, no bystanders, no emergency lights. The picture had been taken before the authorities ever arrived. Someone had been there first, someone who didn't want Cameron rescued. Ruth slid the photo back into the envelope, her heartbeat hammering as she looked toward the dark stretch of highway where Elias had vanished. He was running from something, and whatever it was, it had been closing in long before the timber vultures found the boy in the woods. Barrett Wyatt didn't waste time licking his wounds. Within a week of losing guardianship, he filed a petition claiming the timber vultures were unfit, unstable, and unsafe for a minor. The paperwork landed on Ruth's desk like a threat written in legal ink. Doug read the first page and let out a low whistle. He's not coming through the woods this time. He's coming through the courthouse. Ruth nodded, jaw tight. And he hired Dana Caldwell. Doug didn't know the name, but Ruth's tone said enough. She's ruthless, Ruth explained. Smart, image-driven, plays the press like a violin. Barrett didn't hire muscle this time. He hired precision. The club gathered around the fire pit as Ruth laid out the situation. This wasn't a fight they could ride through on instinct or intimidation. It wasn't the kind of enemy they could scare off with engines and patched vests. This battle happened in hearing rooms, over paperwork, guided by people who had never slept in a cabin or eaten from a fire pit in their lives. Oscar listened quietly, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Cameron sat near his knee, rolling a bolt between his fingers, an unconscious closeness no one missed. He gravitated toward Oscar as if the man were a compass point, and Oscar felt it, heavy, unexpected, terrifying. You don't have to be anything you're not, Victoria murmured to him when they stepped aside afterward. He just needs you steady. Oscar rubbed the back of his neck. He keeps copying me. The way I stand. The way I hold tools. I'm afraid he'll notice the things I haven't figured out yet. Victoria gave him a soft look. That's how kids learn. They borrow pieces of someone until they find their own shape. But Oscar didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward Cameron, who was now studying the spokes of a bike wheel, mirroring Oscar's posture from the day before. Shane Lorne arrived just after noon that same day. Thin, pale, wearing a too-clean denim jacket that hadn't seen real work. He introduced himself as a writer looking for a club with structure, which immediately made Doug suspicious. Most people came to the Timber Vultures for community, not structure. Still, Deke allowed him to stay as a guest. The Vultures never turned people away just because they were odd. But Victoria noticed patterns quickly. Every time Cameron stepped into a room, Shane was already there, pretending to be organizing tools, drinking water, checking his phone. He smiled too easily, nodded too eagerly, never asked real questions. Just hovered. Victoria brought it up to Oscar quietly. He's in Cameron's orbit too often. Oscar agreed. He watches the doors more than the people. They didn't confront him yet, but eyes sharpened. Conversations dropped to whispers when Shane walked by. Meanwhile, Ruth kept pursuing Elias Mercer, the man who had run from her in the motel parking lot. She found him again 2 days later, sitting alone in the back booth of a diner off Route 11, his hands shaking around a chipped coffee mug. This time he didn't run. "Sit," he said, voice frayed. "I'm tired of being hunted." Ruth sat across from him without taking out her badge. She wanted the truth, not fear. "What happened the night of the crash, Elias?" His throat bobbed. "It wasn't supposed to be like that." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I was told to take Cameron somewhere. Not to a hospital. Somewhere secure. They never said where." "Who told you?" Elias hesitated long enough for Ruth to feel the weight of whatever name sat on his tongue. When he finally whispered it, she felt her pulse spike. It wasn't Barrett. It was someone working for him. Someone with access. Someone close enough to move a child without raising alarms. Elias gripped the mug tightly. "When I saw the wreck, when I saw them, panicked, I yelled at the boy to run. It was the only thing I could think of. Then I left, and I've been running ever since." Ruth leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because someone was outside my motel room last night." His voice lowered. "And they weren't there to talk." He slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. "This is the last warning I got before I left town." Ruth unfolded it, but instead of a note, she found the corner of a printed document. A fragment of a legal agreement. something that looked like a transfer order. The details were smudged, but the signature line was intact. The signature didn't belong to Barrett. It belonged to someone else entirely, someone she hadn't expected to see tied to the case. She tucked the paper away. "You need to leave the state. Tonight. I'll take it from here." He nodded, defeated, and slipped out through the side door without looking back. That evening, Oscar returned from the workshop to find Victoria standing rigid outside her cabin, eyes fixed on something in her hand. As he got closer, she lifted it slightly. A cell phone, and the screen displayed a photo taken only minutes earlier. A photo of Cameron sitting at her cabin table. Oscar felt the air drain from his lungs. Who took that? Victoria turned the phone around and pointed toward the side of the cabin. Shane stood there, trying to look casual, a camera strap hanging from his wrist. The moment he realized they'd seen him, his expression faltered, and the war Barrett started from the courthouse suddenly reached the club's doorstep. The courthouse smelled of paper and stale carpet, the kind of place where lives were rearranged with signatures instead of shouting. Ruth spread her evidence across the long oak table. Photos, medical logs, Elias Mercer's trembling statement, each piece landing like a strike against the story Barrett Wyatt had spent years constructing. Doug leaned over the documents, whistling under his breath. "If this doesn't break the case open, nothing will." "It will," Ruth said. "It's not about proving Barrett caused the crash. It's about proving he knew more than he ever admitted, and acted to keep Cameron from being found." The hearing began late in the morning. Dana Caldwell entered the room dressed like victory itself. Sharp charcoal suit, polished shoes, and a calm confidence that irritated everyone instantly. She smiled too easily, the smile of someone who enjoyed debating more than telling the truth. "Let's begin," the judge said, rubbing his eyes as if he already regretted being assigned this case. Dana moved first. "Your Honor, we are here because a vulnerable minor has been placed with individuals who have no formal training, no resources appropriate for trauma care, and no stability to offer long-term safety." She turned toward the Timber Vulture's side of the room, her tone dripping with professional courtesy. "A motorcycle club," she said. "Hardly the environment for a recovering child." Oscar tensed, but Victoria placed a calming hand on his arm. She rose before Ruth could stop her. "May I speak?" Ruth nodded once. Victoria stepped forward, hands steady despite the tremor beneath her ribs. "Cameron is afraid of doors slamming. He panics when someone walks up behind him. He didn't know how to ask for help when he arrived. He barely knew how to rest." Dana raised an eyebrow. "You're proving my point." "No," Victoria said softly. "I'm proving what he survived." Even the judge paused, pen frozen midair. Victoria continued. "He learned to speak again sitting by a fire with us. He learned to trust by watching Oscar fix engines. He asked every night if he was allowed to stay. Not because we made him doubt, but because someone else taught him survival meant leaving before anyone grabbed him." Even the judge paused his note-taking. Victoria's voice remained low, but the weight of it filled the room. "He isn't in danger with us. The danger is everything outside this room." Dana clicked her pen, irritation bleeding through her practiced calm. "Emotional testimony doesn't override legality. That's why we brought evidence," Ruth said, sliding a photograph across the table. The judge leaned in. The image showed the crash site before authorities arrived. No tape, no responders, just a shadowed figure bending into the wreck. "And this was taken when?" he asked. "Before the police were even notified," Ruth replied. "Meaning someone got there first. Someone who wanted control of the scene." Dana stiffened, but Ruth wasn't finished. She placed the missing hospital records down. Then Elias's signed statement. Then the partial transfer document with its incriminating signature. Piece by piece, the neat narrative Barrett had built began collapsing. The judge exhaled slowly. "I see no grounds to remove guardianship. I do, however, see grounds to compel Mr. Wyatt's testimony under oath. Back at the campground, Shane Lorne sat on a folding chair between Doug and Oscar, looking like a man waiting for a sentence he already knew he deserved. He didn't try to hide anything now. The mask had slipped. "I was paid to watch," he said quietly. "Not to harm the kid. They just wanted updates. Photos. Movement. Nothing else." "Who paid you?" Doug asked. Shane swallowed. "A contractor named Whitlock. Works for Barrett. Emails came from a secure address. I saved everything." "Why admit it now?" Oscar asked. Shane looked toward the cabin where Cameron sat with Lauren, drawing slow circles on a sketch pad. "Because I didn't know what they'd do with the information. And once I saw what he'd been through, I couldn't keep feeding the machine." Victoria crossed her arms. "You could have told us sooner." "I know," Shane said softly. "I'm sorry. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something the club could use." When Ruth returned that evening, Cameron was waiting on the porch. He didn't run to her, he didn't run to anyone, but he stood with intent, eyes searching her face. She knelt. "We're closer to the truth, Cameron." He hesitated, then whispered, "Go court." "Yes," Ruth said. "Your uncle will have to answer questions now." Cameron's fingers curled in the hem of his shirt. "Does that mean no one tells me run again?" The question hit harder than any accusation in court. Victoria stepped behind him, resting a hand gently on his shoulder. "No one," she said. "Not ever." A few days later, Ruth asked Oscar and Victoria to take Cameron somewhere important. Not to confront the past, but to show him it no longer controlled him. They walked together along the old service road, branches whispering overhead. Cameron slowed as they approached the curve where the crash had happened. The tree stood unchanged, scarred bark twisting up its trunk like a memory carved into wood. He stepped forward on his own. He placed a hand against the mark, his breathing calm, steady. No panic, just a calm understanding. Then he reached into his pocket. A small chrome bolt lay in his palm, the same one Oscar had given him while they worked on the old Harley a few weeks earlier. Cameron pressed it gently into a crack in the bark. A piece of his present, resting where his past had tried to swallow him whole. Oscar felt his throat tighten. Victoria brushed a tear from her cheek. Cameron turned back toward them, toward the life he had built, not the one that chased him into the woods. And the road didn't look like a place he escaped from. It looked like a place he could finally walk away in peace. This story reminds us that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building something stronger beside it. Cameron didn't choose what happened to him, but he chose who he trusted, and that changed everything. What would you have done in Oscar's or Victoria's place? Tell us in the comments below. And if this journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that stay with you long after they end. See you in our next video.